And we are live. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris, and this is my channel, We Love Comics. And today we are doing a spoiler Avengers Infinity War review. So I cannot stress this enough. There will be spoilers pretty much not only for this part of the movie, but even most likely for part 2, which will be coming out in 2019. So if you don't want to know what happened in this movie or what could potentially happen in the next movie, then you may want to skip this video, so you have been warned. So with that being said, for those of you who have already seen it or have no interest in seeing it or just want to try and get as much out of the movie as they can, well, enjoy the rest of this video. Alright, so that should leave plenty of time for people to walk out if they don't want to know any spoilers. So at this point, if you're listening, that's on you. So I've seen this movie now a couple of times. I even took my wife to go see it, and she seemed to have enjoyed it. She's not a comic book fan like I am, so she's not going to understand a lot of the movie like those of us who are into the comic books. Now, I do have a non-spoiler review that I made the other day, so if you want to just get a general review of what I thought about it, you may want to watch that one. But this one, we're going to start getting into some of the details, because I wanted to make sure I saw it more than once before I gave more of a detailed type of review. First thing I have to say off the bat, one of the things that I love about movies when I know they're going to be good is their rewatchability. There are plenty of movies out there that are good, but you never want to watch more than once, or if you see it a second time, you'll be satisfied. This is one of those movies that you could watch several times and be entertained. Now, it helps to watch previous Marvel movies to really get the full effect of this movie. So if you're going in not have watched any of the Marvel movies, like the Marvel movies I would recommend to watch before seeing this movie is the Captain America movies, the Iron Man movies, Thor, and Guardians of the Galaxy. Those are pretty much the ones that you're going to need if you want to really be invested in this. Because if you go in without watching them, certain events that I will discuss in this video that happen won't really affect you as much. So you really need to see some of the older movies, but you don't have to see all of them. Like, you don't have to watch Ant-Man. You really don't have to watch Black Panther. I mean, you can, but it doesn't really majorly get you to be in depth with this movie. What other movies? But basically the main ones are the ones you want to watch. Of course, the Avengers movies as well. The one thing I'll have to say about this movie, like I said in my spoiler-free, is this movie is one of Marvel's darkest movies. And if you ever read the comics based on this movie, you can understand why they needed to go there. Now, I was actually shocked with how many. So now we're going to start getting into some of the spoilers. I mean, it starts out where Thor Ragnarok basically leaves off when you see the after-credit scene, where you see Thor and all of his Asgardians in the ship after Asgard, you know, spoiler alert for that also, was destroyed, being attacked by Thanos' ship with the Black Order. And right off the bat, we have a major character's death. And and it's funny because when you watch the trailers for this movie, you kind of see Loki as one of the people who's going to basically sell out and become a villain again. And in this movie, that's not the case. So the trailers for this, a lot of it is very misleading because a lot of stuff is kind of taken out of context. There are images that are actually not used in the movie or seen in a way that was not portrayed in the movie. So I like that they did that because it made you kind of guess. So one of our first deaths that we see is Loki as he tries to attack Thanos. Another thing I found interesting is, especially when they use that kind of we have a Hulk thing, and that's why it pays to watch the other movies to kind of understand the joke behind that. It's actually amazing that they see the Hulk go one-on-one against Thanos, and at that point, he only had one of the Infinity Stones, which was the Power Stone. And they don't show how he got it, but obviously if you watch the Guardians of the Galaxy, you know where the Power Stone went. So obviously it's assumed that he went there and got the Power Stone. So he only had one of the stones. And how he goes toe-to-toe with Thanos, and then basically within 10 seconds he turns around and beats the living daylights out of the Hulk. And one of the things I like about that is, and this is where the trailers are misleading, because the trailers make you think that the Hulk is in the main battle scenes, especially in Wakanda, and that is actually not the case. And it's actually funny and disappointing at the same time, where you don't see the Hulk again for the rest of the movie, basically making you believe that the Hulk is afraid for the first time in his life. That's why he doesn't. Bruce Banner tries to turn into the Hulk, and he can't do it. I guess that's that whole kind of joke about a man's performance at a certain age. I kind of got that from that kind of thing that they were trying to portray there. But Hulk was actually afraid, and that, to me, was kind of silly. But, I mean, if anything, it saves you a lot of money on the CGI effects with using the Hulk and everything. But I like the fact that they at least tried to do something different. Now, they end up blowing up the ship. Now, one of the people you don't see on that ship is Valkyrie. Because if you watch Thor Ragnarok, she was on that ship. You don't see Korg either. So you don't know the fate of those two individuals. But it's hard to say what happens, because you see that they ultimately destroy the ship. So who survives, we don't really know. But what happens is the Hulk gets beamed back to Earth. And that's where you see that scene in the trailers where he smashes through the steps and meets Doctor Strange for the first time. The meeting with Iron Man I thought was pretty decent. Iron Man played a good job in this movie. I think the fact that they tried a little bit too hard with the jokes. And I'll say right now, one of the characters I can say I'm disappointed in this movie, and even the last movie, is Drax. Because in the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, they used him in a really good way. He was entertaining. He did have a sense of humor. But I liked his motivation. He was more of a main character. And now they're basically kind of use him as the go-to person for a quick little gag. And I think they're ruining or toning down a character that could really have some good potential. Broke Cousin Comics says, do you think Loki's dead? That is an interesting question, because if you saw Thor 2, The Dark World, well, in that movie, he supposedly dies too, but it ends up that, because he's a trickster and he can make illusions, was he really killed in that moment? And I guess we'll find out in the next movie, but that is a very good question. And in a way, it doesn't really matter, and I'll get into that, especially if you've read the comics. And I think the reason that Marvel could get so dark in this particular movie is because of the fact of one particular stone that's in the Infinity Gauntlet that eventually he gets. So, again, I mean, obviously at this point, it's a spoiler alert. By the end of the movie, Thanos gets all of the stones, all of the Infinity Stones. But the major one that will show that all of the events in this movie really have no consequence is the Time Stone. Because basically, throughout the movie, that's one of the biggest ones that he needed to get. Now, before I get into that, obviously, one of the deaths that I thought was actually really dramatic, because a lot of the deaths actually would affect people, but the one that I think had the most impact was Gamora, which is the quote-unquote daughter of Thanos. And they give a little bit of an origin story of her and how Thanos discovered her. They don't get into a major deal, but they show her as a child. But for him to get the Soul Stone, he had to sacrifice something he loved. And I thought the scene where he realizes that the one thing he loves is Gamora, his quote-unquote daughter. It's not really his daughter. Obviously, you'd say, I guess, maybe stepdaughter or something like that, or kidnapped daughter, who knows. So I guess it's okay to kidnap somebody in the Marvel Universe and have them, be your daughter. A little deeper if you think about it. But he ends up, to get the Soul Stone, they have to trade a soul for a soul. Now, before I tell you what happens, there was only one cameo that appeared in this movie that surprised me. They didn't, by the way they were talking of how many people are in these movies, basically there was only one new character that actually I got that wow moment. And that was in the scene where they were going to get the Soul Stone. So the character, you all of a sudden, they're on this planet and they're climbing up this mountain. Then all of a sudden you see this almost like a Grim Reaper kind of costume. And you don't know who it is because they black out the face. Then all of a sudden they close in and you find out that lo and behold, a character that you haven't seen for probably 6 or 7 years at least, it ends up being the Red Skull. Now, I thought that was a cool moment, but that was pretty much the only new or newer or brought back character. I actually was disappointed. The one thing I could say I'm disappointed in is they don't manage to take any of the TV characters, and I think that's something where there's a missed opportunity, because especially when you're dealing with, you know, problems in New York. I mean, even if they did a cameo of, you know, like Luke Cage or Daredevil, I think fans, especially Marvel fans and comic book fans of both the movies and TV shows, would have went crazy for that. So they didn't add any real new characters except for the Red Skull. And it wasn't even the original character that played the Red Skull. It ended up, the person that played the new version, because obviously when you're talking the Red Skull, there's a lot of CGI and everything, so you could pretty much get anybody to do it, because nowadays they just get a person in a suit and they put CGI effects. I mean, technically anybody could play the Hulk, because, you know, when Bruce Banner turns into the Hulk, he could be anybody because it's all CGI. So the guy that actually ended up playing that minor role for the Red Skull, I forget his name, but he's in The Walking Dead. He is one of the guys that does all the different voices. He does Jack Nicholson and all these other voices and stuff like that. I forget his name, so if you know who he is, place it in the comments section. But he has to find out, Thanos has to find out that in order to get the Soul Stone, he has to make a sacrifice. He has to exchange a soul for a soul, basically. And he ends up taking his daughter, his quote-unquote daughter, Gamora, and sacrificing her life, and actually kills her by throwing her off the edge of a cliff. So I thought that was kind of a very dramatic scene, and I thought of all the deaths, because there's a lot of them, I thought that one was the most touching, I guess, in a way. They did it very well. And Caleb says, I would love to have seen Frank Castle go to town on Thanos. I would have loved to have seen Frank Castle too, but obviously, I mean, he just basically wields guns, and that's really not going to do anything against Thanos. So I can understand where they wouldn't have had him confronted. But, I mean, on the streets of New York, you could have seen him, you know, I don't know, maybe helping to save people or something. But I would have loved to have seen some of the characters, even people from the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I mean, none of them showed up. So, to me, that was a little disappointing. I mean, there's still part 2, so who knows? But I don't think they're ever going to do that. And I think that's a shame. And I really think if one day, if they did a Marvel movie and all of a sudden you saw, for example, like Daredevil from the TV show, I think people would go crazy. And that's a missed opportunity that they really need to do. And I would love to hear your opinions on that. Another person in Broke Cousin Comics said this, that Beta Ray Bill might be in the next one. I would love to see that, but I don't think they're going to do it because of the fact that I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was Beta Ray Bill that had the Stormbringer hammer or / axe. I don't know if it was called Stormbringer or not. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but if that is the case, then they're taking away the very thing that makes him popular. And I think it would be hard to throw in a character that most people out of the comics wouldn't know about. So I don't think they would actually use him for that reason. Like us comic collectors and comic lovers, we know who Beta Ray Bill is. But ask the average person that's going to go to the movies, they'll have no idea what you're talking about. So I think for that very reason, they wouldn't bring him. And that's why most people, when you saw Thor Ragnarok, they show a statue on the side of the building, or the tower, of Beta Ray Bill, and most people didn't know who that was. So I would love to see him, but I don't see it happening. Now, as far as deaths are concerned, one of the bad things about Marvel pointing out all of the future movies that's coming out, it takes away from what they did. Because some of the people that died in this movie, I mean, you have Doctor Strange dies at the end. You have most of the Guardians of the Galaxy, including Star-Lord and Groot and, well, obviously Gamora, but Drax, Mantis, they all end up dying. You have the Falcon dies. You even have Black Panther die. And yes, and it was one of the more dramatic ones at the end where you basically really feel for it, Spider-Man. Now, the problem with that is you already know there's going to be a Spider-Man 2. You already know there's going to be a Doctor Strange 2. You already know there's going to be a Black Panther 2. So it kind of takes away from what could have been very dramatic moments. I mean, it still kind of shocks you to see that happen. And basically the way they die is at the end, like I said, Thanos gets all 6 stones, and he gets the last one, which is the Mind Stone, which I thought was pretty cool because he was invading Wakanda like you see in the trailers, and he's basically mopping the floor with everybody. And he's about to get to Vision because they basically go there because that's where Vision was, and that was the last stone that they needed. And Vision's basically saying, you know, the only way to fix this is to destroy the Mind Stone, which would basically destroy him. So he was trying to do a self-sacrifice. And they were trying their hardest to protect him to prevent that from happening. And in a dramatic scene where Thanos appears, and he's basically, like I said, going through all the superheroes like they're just, you know, senior citizens with walkers, he's about to get to the Vision, but the Scarlet Witch basically stops him, and she ends up destroying the Mind Stone, which, of course, kills Vision. And you think, well, that's a big sacrifice. That could actually ruin it for Thanos because he needs all 6 of them to do the whole snap the finger thing. But then you remember that right before that situation, he ends up getting the Time Stone. And I'm going to get into that for a minute because I think that's very important, the whole Time Stone scenario of what happened, especially with the next part of the movie, Part 2. So he uses the Time Stone to take back that moment and actually bring Vision back. And it was pretty graphic what they did. I mean, they basically see it rip it out of his head, and you see a chunk of his skull get pulled. I guess the reason they could do that is because technically he's an android and a machine, so it's not like a human being with brains and guts. So you only see like wires and sparks. But it was still, I thought, was a pretty dramatic moment. And one of the things I love is they really made Thor become very powerful. Now, there is a problem with the whole continuity, because when it comes to the Infinity Gauntlet, if you remember watching the first Thor movie, they show, as they're walking through, you know, the little area where they have all the trophies in the first Thor movie, they show an Infinity Gauntlet. Now, that was a right-handed glove, not a left-handed glove. So they ended up in Thor Ragnarok saying that that particular one is fake. Now, here's the problem. It ends up when Thor is trying to get a new hammer by going to an area where these giant dwarves live. They're the ones that forged his hammer and can forge magical weapons. They say that, and this is where Peter Dinklage's character comes in. He plays this gigantic dwarf that was the one that was responsible for making the Infinity Gauntlet. So that means that there's a problem with the continuity, because the first Thor movie, I guess when it comes to the Marvel timeline, happened about approximately 2 years ago in the Marvel timeline. Now, they're saying that how Thanos got the gauntlet is by having those dwarves make that Infinity Gauntlet. And that they were complaining that, you know, Asgards was supposed to protect them. So that means there's time that goes by where that means that Thanos would have had to have gotten that glove before they even show that glove in Thor #1. Which means all that time, that means the creators of Thor's hammer were already slaughtered. And that means for years they did nothing about it. So it'd be interesting to see how they get out of that little problem. But, unless you really dig into it, most people are not really going to get that far into it. Now, the one thing I want to talk about now is the Time Stone, because I think this is going to be very important to the next movie. Now, when you see basically Doctor Strange and Iron Man first meet, and they end up getting into the little fight, and they get into that spaceship that you see in the trailers with Spider-Man. Doctor Strange basically says, and it's rightfully so, because he doesn't really know these characters yet. I mean, we know them, but they're just technically meeting at that moment. Doctor Strange says, if it comes between you as in Iron Man, the kid as in Spider-Man, and the Time Stone, I won't hesitate to let both of you die to protect the Time Stone. Because basically Iron Man's idea is, why don't we just, as he says, throw it away in the garbage? And Doctor Strange says, I'm sworn to protect the Time Stone. So they end up on Thanos' home planet of Titan. So we have, at the moment, and we have Spider-Man, we have Doctor Strange, we have also the Guardians of the Galaxy. They meet up there, and Iron Man. And they come up with this plan, which I thought was a pretty decent plan. But it ends up not working because of the fact that Star-Lord, who was ending up, you find out in here, is in love with Gamora, and she's in love with him. They finally, put that to rest. Finds out that Thanos killed her, and instead of allowing them to take off the glove, he ends up going into a rage, which ends up awakening him from the trance that he was in, because they kind of held him down, and then Mantis jumped on him and kind of held him with her powers. But he kind of messes it up by getting too emotionally involved, and he gets the glove back. Now, before that scene happens, when Iron Man is making the plan that you see in the trailer with Star-Lord, and he says, your plan stinks, you see all of a sudden Doctor Strange in this weird meditation pose. He's kind of floating in the air, and his head's spinning all over the place. And they ask him what's happening. And he said he used the Time Stone to go into the future to be able to check every possible scenario to find an outcome of what would happen if they fought Thanos. How could they win? And they asked him, well, how many futures did you see? And he said basically over 14 million possibilities, with only one that allowed them to win. So I think that part is incredibly crucial to not only what follows, but what's going to happen in the next movie. Because, like I said a few minutes ago, when they were in the spaceship, Doctor Strange said to Tony Stark, if it becomes between you and the kid Spider-Man and the Time Stone, I won't hesitate to let you die. But there's a scene where you see in the trailers where Iron Man is fighting Thanos on what is now known as Titan, Thanos' home planet. And in the middle of the battle, one of the things I liked is basically Iron Man's getting the upper hand at one point, and he's pummeling him all over the place. And with all the might and all the new powers of his suit and all the things he does, he basically causes a little scratch on Thanos' cheek where it gives a drop of blood. And I thought it was just funny, all of that for one drop of blood. And that's when basically Thanos is like, all right, enough toying with this guy. And he starts pummeling him. And then Iron Man basically turns his arm into a sword, tries to stab Thanos, where he grabs it, snaps it in two, and then rams it into Iron Man's stomach. And in the movie theater, I remember everybody was gasping and be like, oh no, this is it. This is where Tony dies. And that's where he gives the whole speech of, I hope, they remember you. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because at that moment, Doctor Strange says, spare Iron Man and I will give you the Time Stone. And there were no tricks, no illusions. That's exactly what he does. So even though he said on the spaceship, I wouldn't hesitate to pick the stone over either of you, he instantly volunteers to give the stone away to save Tony's life. Now, a lot of people may be watching that scene and say, well, why would he do that when he swore to protect the stone, and he said just a few moments ago that he would not hesitate to let them die to protect the stone, and then he literally hands it to Thanos. Well, if you think about the previous scene where he's checking the futures, out of 14 million different possibilities, he only saw one way that would end up winning. So if you think about it, what if the one way was not allowing Tony Stark to die? And it meant even sacrificing himself to know that eventually they would all come back. So that's why I think, I mean, if you read the comic, The Infinity Gauntlet, you pretty much know what's about to happen. And the ending of this particular movie doesn't really surprise you, because ultimately in the end, even though Thor almost got the upper hand and almost kills Thanos, almost doesn't work, he ultimately snaps his fingers and half of the universe dies. And he says it's a mercy killing. Now, in the comic books, his motivation was he was in love with what was called Death. And it was basically a woman skeleton. But he was in love with her. And he wanted to prove his worth by giving her what she wants, because she was Death. He wanted to kill half the universe to show how powerful he was and try and, get in good with Death. But in this movie, they didn't use Death, which is a little disappointing. They didn't do that. They went the route of, well, it's a finite universe with a finite amount of resources, and if we continue this trend, we're all going to die, so it's better to kill half the people than all the people die. So it's kind of that whole, global warming kind of situation stuff, and not enough food on the planet kind of thing, and the ends justify the means. So I thought that was an okay motivation, but I would have loved to have gone with the comics, but in a way I can kind of understand why they didn't. But if you didn't read the comic, you would be more shocked and surprised by the ending. Because like I said, characters like, Doctor Strange die. The Winter Soldier dies. Falcon dies. Black Panther dies. Spider-Man dies. All these major characters. But if you know anything about the comic, and this is the major part for the next movie, I'm sure pretty much everybody that dies in this movie will come back. Because if they do end up getting the gauntlet, well, they have now the time stone, and they can just go back in time, or they can use the reality stone and change the reality of what happened, or they could find out that, because if you read the comics, the characters didn't die. They ended up getting absorbed into the Soul Stone. And that's why you see that moment at the end when he snaps his fingers. All of a sudden you see Thanos in this weird, almost lake area where there's this little, the little girl Gamora there. And she says, did you do it? And what did it cost? I think he was inside the Soul Stone at that moment. So I think you can have either the Time Stone, turn back time. You can have the Reality Stone, just change the reality of what happened. Or you can have them go into the Soul Stone and get everybody out through that area. Or it could be a combination of a couple of them. So if you've actually read the comics, you pretty much know what's going on. But even if you didn't, like I said earlier, and this is the disappointing part about them telling all the future movies, is since you know there's a Spider-Man 2, since you know there's going to be a Black Panther 2, since you know there's going to be a Doctor Strange 2, a Guardians of the Galaxy 3, well, then the deaths that happened in this movie don't really have the same effect, and I think that's why they could get away with killing, quote-unquote, so many characters in this movie. Now, it was still impactful. I mean, I've seen this movie now 4 times. And each time, especially the Spider-Man death and the Gamora death, I think those were done so well. And even to a lesser extent with Vision. Because especially that not only did he have to die once through the hands of the person he says he loved, which is the Scarlet Witch, but then he gets brought back and then basically has the mind gem ripped from his head and has to die a second time. I thought that was to a lesser extent impactful as well, but at least they took the risk. Now, there is no Hawkeye in this movie. There's no Ant-Man in this movie. No Wasp. But at the end, when they show the after-credit scene, and there's only one, you see that they're getting ready for Captain Marvel. And I won't give that away. If you want to watch it, you can. I don't want to spoil that. There's plenty of places you could watch that for. But Adam Warlock, I'm pretty sure, is going to be in the second part. I mean, they've already set that up with Guardians of the Galaxy. As far as main character, one person, I don't know who owns it. I think it might still be under Fox Properties. If anybody knows, let me know. But Mephisto. I don't know if he's categorized as a Fantastic Four character, but also, you know, because his first appearance is in Silver Surfer #3, and Silver Surfer is considered under the Fantastic Four. So I don't know if Mephisto is technically under Fox, but Mephisto was a main reason to help the good guys win in the Infinity Gauntlet comic book. It was a little disappointing that he couldn't be used. But I would love to see if they can get an agreement, because I don't know if they'll add anything. And actually, there was an interview with Kevin Feige that he said one of the first Avengers after credit scenes, the shawarma scene, was actually done after the premiere. So even though the movie was completely done and they already had the premiere, they actually added that scene afterwards. So I really hope they get the Fox deal done, because the Fantastic Four, especially Silver Surfer, needs to be in part 2, because there's a big role that he plays. And again, if Mephisto is part of the Fantastic Four licensing agreement that they did, he is a big part of it as well. I don't know if they can introduce him at this point, but I would love to see that. But like I said, when they do all of these advanced movies, I mean, they basically killed off almost every single Guardians of the Galaxy character in this movie. So when they have already said there's going to be a Guardians of the Galaxy 3, well, how can you have a Guardians of the Galaxy 3 with no Drax, no Groot, no Star-Lord, no Gamora, and no Mantis? I mean, that's just ridiculous. Obviously, you can't have a Spider-Man 2 without Spider-Man. So, in that sense, it does take away from it. And I think Marvel, what they need to do, and it's kind of hard to do at this point, but if they get new movies, don't announce them right away. Especially if you're about to do a movie that's going to be directly affecting the emotions of the people watching that particular movie. Because if you know there's going to be a Guardians of the Galaxy 3, well, the fact that almost 90% of the Guardians of the Galaxy in this movie die, it doesn't hold the same emotional weight. So I think they dropped the ball there. But I have to say, overall, this movie is one of the best movies that they've done. You know, it's like any movie. They're going to have their moments where you're going to question certain things, or, you know, there's going to be something you didn't like about it. I mean, there's no perfect movie out there. But the fact that this movie has only been out since Thursday, and I've already seen it 4 times, and I know people have seen it 2, 3, 4 times already themselves, tells you everything you need to know about this movie. Now, if you don't know anything about the comic books, you're going to be a little disappointed in the ending. Because in the ending, because at one point, you know, Iron Man was having a discussion with Thanos in the middle of their fights, or I think it was, I'm not sure, but they were asking, you know, what would you do once you've achieved your goal? And he says, basically, I'll just sit down and enjoy the sun, you know, setting on a new universe, a happy universe, that he did his job. And that's basically where the movie ends. He snaps his finger. You see all of the major characters that I talked about. They basically just turn into, it almost looks like a pile of leaves or dust, and just blow away. And again, the only really dramatic one was Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And that one was kind of, you could hear it, it was kind of the tearjerker of the movie death scenes. And then at the end, you just see Thanos goes and looks out into the sunset, sits down, you see a little smile, and the movie ends. So if you haven't seen any of these movies and you don't know about the comics, and there are going to be people who don't know there is a part 2. They're going to be like, well, why did it end that way? Most people like us that are into the comics are going to know, well, there's part 2. It's most likely going to be called the Infinity Gauntlet. And we pretty much know what happens. Now, obviously, they're going to change things a little bit. but we pretty much know they're going to bring all of these major characters out, or back. How they do it is really the way. So I'd love to know what you think. Like I said, I think there's three possibilities. They're either going to use the time stone to go back in time, but the problem with that is, then that means Thanos would be back on his quest again. So how far would they have to go back? They would also be able to use the reality stone, which means they could change the reality of everything that happened, like it never happened in this particular reality. The other benefit of using the reality stone is that's a perfect way to introduce the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. Because all of a sudden, if you change the reality, you can now all of a sudden have a reality where the X-Men and the Fantastic Four were already, or always there. So that could be an interesting way, if they do it, to introduce the Fantastic Four, the Silver Surfers, even the Mephistos, all these other characters. But I really hope they bring some of the other characters. I would love to see Ghost Rider in this movie, in Part 2. I would love to see some of the street-level characters. I mean, I think it might be a little too late, but then again, you never know, because now half of the heroes are gone. Maybe they might need some of the street-level characters to be able to step up to the plate. Luke Cage is a pretty powerful person. Using Jessica Jones, maybe they might need that at this point and use whoever they can get. I would love to see that, but somebody like Ghost Rider should definitely be in there. Captain Marvel's going to be in it because they basically set that up in the after-credit scene, and they've talked about that already. There's so many different people. Ant-Man you haven't seen, so I'm sure he'll be used. Hawkeye, who knows what part he's going to play, but again, he's just a normal human being with, as like he says, and he has a bow and arrow. I mean, what could he really do? But I guess it remains to be seen. So I would love to know, in your opinion, who do you think will not come back? Now, do you think every single character will come back from the quote-unquote dead? Or, like I said, the third option is they're in the Soul Stone. Because remember, the people that would be trapped in the Soul Stone would only be the people where Thanos snapped his fingers. So somebody, for example, like Loki, he wouldn't be trapped in the Soul Stone unless he was using his trickster techniques and he wasn't really dying. The reason I don't think they did that is because I think Thanos would be so powerful that he would know if it was an illusion. Because, I mean, every time somebody tried to stab him, without him supposedly knowing, he was right on top of it. So I don't know if Loki could have gotten that over on Thanos. So how would they bring back Loki if they bring him back? The same thing with, like, Vision. Because Vision didn't die at the snap of his fingers. He died because he ripped the stone out of his head. So I'd be interested to see how they bring him back. So I would love to know in the comments section, first of all, what you thought about the movie if you saw it. Second of all, what do you think about my kind of review? Because I know these aren't going to be my most popular videos because I don't do them very often. But I would love to know, who do you think is going to not come back? And always keep in mind, because a lot of people thought Captain America was going to die in this movie. A lot of people thought Iron Man was going to die in this movie. And a lot of people say, well, we pretty much know they're going to die because their contracts are up. Well, keep in mind that just because a contract is up doesn't mean it can't be renewed. Because remember, Iron Man's contract was up before Infinity War. But he re-upped to do these movies. Same thing with Captain America, with Chris Evans. Same thing with, Chris Hemsworth. Their contracts were up, but you can always renew them. So they may be saving that, because if you think their contracts are up, well, that must mean certain doom. So let me know what you think about this. So there's plenty of things about this movie. I think overall, out of 5 stars, I would give this 4.5 stars. It's definitely got the rewatchability. It's definitely got, even though you kind of know as a comic fan what's going to be happening in Part 2, the death scenes and everything still really weigh heavily on you. The actions were great, but it also had a good story. You really got to know the villain in the character development. They don't do that very often with the villains. They're usually just one-and-done characters, and you don't really get to learn too much about them. This one is definitely not one of those movies. You get to know Thanos and almost kind of see his motivations, even if you may not agree with his tactics. So that's it. I want to thank you guys. I have a non-spoiler video review if you want to watch that. Not many people saw it, but that's okay. If 1 or 2 people like it, that's who I'm doing it for. I got some other comic book videos coming on their way in the next day or so. And if you have any requests of things that you'd like to see, put that in the comments section. Let me know what you thought about the movie. Let me know about the impacts of the deaths, where you think part 2 is going to go. Are you looking forward to seeing it? And again, what kind of characters do you think will not come back? And tell us why, in your opinion. So to all of you that came in to take the time to listen to what I had to say, I want to thank you guys. I love the fact that people really pay attention to what I say. Hit subscribe if you haven't. Check out some of my other comic book videos. And I'll see you guys next time. I hope you all have a great day.